In the late 1400s, Europeans would first arrive in the Americas, encountering many native tribes practicing very unfamiliar and brutal traditions of torture. These traditions of violence towards criminals and prisoners of tribal conflict was deeply engraved into the culture of some of these more vicious tribes. It was common for them to have a level of creativity that was shocking, even to the standards of the European settlers who were no strangers to public executions and violence. In this video we'll be covering some of these ruthless methods, and how being captured by many of these tribes could in fact be one of the worst ways to die. These are 5 of the most savage torture methods of American Indians. Number 5. Cooking of the eye. Some Indian tribes in eastern North America seemingly gained great satisfaction from the prolonged torture of captives in tribal warfare. One of these methods included tying a person in place, or burying them neck deep in the ground. The victim would have their head fixed in an upright position with a series of sharp sticks placed around their head and jaw, forcing them to look straight upward into the scorching sun before the worst part of the torture would be enacted. It was at this point that the unfortunate person would have their eyelids torn off with a dull blade, and left in the searing hot sun for as long as multiple days. Their eyes would be roasted in their head while being forced to stare constantly into the sun, causing the victim to die from either shock or dehydration resulting from the savage torture. Number 4. Scalping. Perhaps one of the more well-known forms of mutilation conducted by many tribes of the Americas, scalping was both a form of torture and a way of claiming trophies from fallen adversaries in battle. Specific scalping techniques would vary somewhat from tribe to tribe, with different shapes, sizes, and intended uses for the severed scalps. The scalper would firmly grasp the hair of a subdued victim, and then with anything from a stone knife to a sharp seashell, make several quick semicircular cuts on either side of their head. They would then vigorously yank at the nearly severed scalp, tearing any remaining flesh still attached, and severing the thin layer of connective tissue from the inner lining of the scalp. Scalping in itself is not fatal, but if the unfortunate victim was to be scalped alive and left gravely wounded on the battlefield, they would have to live the rest of their life with the brutal scars of this savage practice. Number 3. Skin peeling. The sheer amount of pain caused by this torture would make it potentially one of the more gruesome methods of the region. It involved stripping a victim naked and binding their hands and feet while holding them in place next to a tree. The torturer would then cut long strips of skin from the person's back, taking care not to remove them fully. They would then nail the strips of flesh to the nearby tree while they were still attached to the victim's back. While attached to the tree by their very own flesh, the torturer would then hold a fiery torch to the back of the victim. As they were burned by the torch, they had the natural instinct to turn from the flame, tearing the flesh from their body in large strips, skinning themselves alive before being once again attached to the tree. This would leave the victim with terrible burns, vast amounts of skin missing from their back and other parts of their body, with nothing to do but beg for death at the hands of their ruthless executioners. Number 2. The arrow hunt. In this strange form of execution, a game would be made of the victim, turning their demise into a cruel form of entertainment for the warriors of the tribe. A prisoner would have their ankles bound together, their hands tied behind their back, and a single arrow would be shot into the distance. Once it landed, the bound person was then commanded to hop their way to the distant arrow, running for their life once they made it. When the victim managed to make their way to the arrow, the competing warriors would then be allowed to pursue the condemned person, hunting them with sharpened sticks like an animal. The first man to capture and kill the fleeing prisoner would claim the person's scalp, winning the contest and turning their death into nothing more than cheap entertainment for the amusement of the tribe. Number 1. The Anthill. Using insects to kill people is not exclusive to the Americas, however the many tribes of the region still had their own creative ways of utilizing bugs as executioners, making this perhaps one of the slowest and most painful ways to be sent to the afterlife. One of these methods was to strip a victim naked, and have copious amounts of honey smeared over every exposed orifice of the person's body. It was then that they would be tied down extremely close to the anthill and left as a bounty for the ants over many days, applying more honey when needed, in order to keep the hungry insects gorging on the victim's flesh. The ants and other pests then proceeded to slowly devour the condemned, marching deep into their body, and feasting on the inner and outer flesh of the exhausted victim. Surprisingly, dehydration and shock was the most likely cause of their prolonged death, with the agony of being eaten alive by insects only acting as an additional pain to suffer while being exposed to the harsh elements. That was 5 of the most savage torture methods of American Indians. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.